Hello, PreSales Collective. It's your host, James Kaikis, and today we are going to be talking about the promotion to leadership with Kelley Pidhirsky, Manager of Solutions Engineering at DocuSign. If you've been following the PreSales Collective, you would notice Kelley's name from our Women in Solutions Excellence panel back in April. I'm really excited for today's episode because Kelley and I are going to talk about the realities of leadership. Kelley has spent years as a high-performing individual contributor and just made the move to leadership. Not only did she make a move in her career to leadership, but she did that during a global pandemic. And so we're going to deep dive in today's episode to talk about what's been going according to plan and maybe what's been a little bit different and talk about those expectations. You know, so many times you've heard me talk about why do employees feel that they have to go into management as a next step? And sometimes people go into it and they thrive and they love it. And there are other times people want to go back to that individual contributor role. So we're going to talk about some of those things today and talk about the realities of first line management. Enjoy today's episode. Good morning. How are you?
I'm great, James. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thanks for being on the PreSales Podcast. I'm excited for today's episode.
I'm beyond excited. A little nervous.
A little nervous is okay. You know, the jitters are okay. It's no problem at all. But you are actually no stranger to the PreSales Collective. So you've already been on a PreSales Collective webinar with the WISE panel as well. So you're a pro at this.
It's a bad thing if you stop being nervous before you go into a big meeting, right? Isn't that what they say?
I like that. It kind of just like humanizes the experience. Before we get into the overall topic today, which is promotion to leadership, congratulations again, by the way, is how has business for you been during the pandemic? Have you adjusted? Has DocuSign adjusted? Have your buyers adjusted? Give us some insights into that.
For anyone that's familiar with DocuSign, which is a pretty cool thing about DocuSign, most people have used DocuSign in their personal and or professional life, whether it's buying a house or signing a contract with your dog walker. I've heard every different DocuStory out there. We're so fortunate to work for a company that enables people to be able to do business remotely. Every day I wake up and I can't believe how fortunate we are to be able to give back in this way. But it's crazy. You know, our customers really, really need us now, and they needed us to be up and running yesterday. So we are running a mile a minute to make sure that we can be there for our customers and support them and allow them to be able to keep business moving forward. So it's an exciting, but certainly incredibly busy time.
Personally, I had some home and car purchases this month, and everything has been through DocuSign. So it's amazing. Would you say that this has forced a lot of companies to adapt and innovate due to the current climate and needing to go digital for signatures?
Absolutely. Not only have I seen that, but at first I kept thinking, are they just going to try to get this up and running temporarily to get through this time? But almost consistently, folks have said, you know, now that we're finally doing this, there's no way we're going back. We've talked to a lot of people that say over the last several years that we want DocuSign, we want to do this, but other priorities are always creep up. You know, these things happen, but now that this is a priority, they're saying there's no way we're going back any other way.
That's so interesting because I'm having some of the same things in manufacturing at Salesforce, because I think so many times companies have wanted to innovate. It just hasn't come to the forefront. And though maybe the one good thing, if you can say that about the pandemic, is it has forced a lot of these companies to innovate, and they've actually become more efficient, and they don't really realize how much easier life would be once they did. So that's great that you're doing that. And it's great to hear that DocuSign is doing well from that perspective. So before we get into today's topic, Kelley, I got to ask, how did you start your pre-sales career?
I love this question. It's my favorite question to ask people because, as you know, James, no one grows up saying, hey, when I grow up someday, I want to be a solution engineer, right? I've seen a few trends and paths where folks are either maybe technical or sales or gosh, we have somebody on our team that was an archaeologist before she came in. That's one of my favorite stories. But I went the path of sales before moving into pre-sales. I know you've heard this story before, but really that concept of I enjoy being able to really get in with a customer and solve problems for them. What I don't enjoy is the hunting aspect of, calling a million different people to try to get that one person on the phone or in person to be able to make that connection and solve those problems. I honestly had never heard of a pre-sales role before. I just knew that after a couple of years of being in sales, it wasn't quite the right fit. So I was putting my resume out to anywhere that I could and got an interview for, I think it was a marketing role. And in the middle of the interview, the HR rep said, have you ever heard about this pre-sales type role? And I was really skeptical because as he was explaining it to me, I said, so wait a minute. What you're saying is I don't have to do any cold calling. I'm only going to talk to people that want to talk to me. I don't have to do any negotiation. And that's what you're saying this job is. And he said, yes, exactly. And this was more years ago, James, than I'm interested in sharing. But I'm still waiting for the gig to be up and for someone to tell me that, no, that's not really how it is. Now that we've sucked you in, that's not how good the job really is. But all these years later, it's still true.
That's a great way to distill down what this role actually is in comparative to sales. I really like that. I haven't heard that before. I might start using that, Kelley.
There you go.
I want to get into today's theme, and I think it's not only topical, but it's actionable for a lot of individuals. Anything that we're trying to do on the podcast, we try to make sure people can walk away with some learnings. And so many times, individual contributors feel that they've maybe hit a ceiling in their career and they feel that management is the next step or they believe it's the next step. But I have conversations with people all the time that not everyone is built for management and not everybody actually wants to go to management. So you see people go back, you see people actually excel in that type of career and wish they did it earlier. So I think talking about promotion to leadership is a perfect topic for our audience. And I think today I'm really interested in your perspective because not only did you move to leadership after many years of top-notch individual contributor work, but you did it during a pandemic. And that sounds like a story that people need to hear. I think where to start is, when did you know that you were ready for the move into management?
Funny you should ask. I feel that that's maybe one of the first lessons we should just dive right into. I don't know that there's ever a right time. I have 2 small children and we are in the middle of a pandemic and our team is growing like crazy. So if you, in any other circumstance, were to say, Kelley, it's time to move into leadership, I think I would have laughed immediately. So first of all, that would be my first piece of advice for folks. There never is a right time. But how did I know I was ready? So I'm very fortunate, and I know that not everyone's going to be this fortunate, but I have incredible leadership here at DocuSign that has been really supportive of my interest in moving into leadership for a few years now. And they've given me a lot of what I would call kind of at-bat practice opportunities to get into it so that when the time would come, which it did, even if it wasn't at the most perfect time ever, that I would feel more ready to step into it. And I will say as a caveat, do I still feel ready? I'm in the role right now, and do I still feel ready? No. There's a lot that I have to learn and a lot that I'm learning every second of every day. But I felt, quote unquote, ready, if you will, because I felt very supported by the folks that were bringing me into this role.
That is great to hear, because I think there's a lot of people who feel that that is their next step because based off personal achievements. But I love to hear that you were supported, and shout out to your leadership for empowering you and putting you in a position to feel comfortable and ready, because you're right. I don't think anyone's actually ready for it. And you talked about learning in the role. I mean, I've been in a leadership role in tech and out of tech for quite some time, and you're always learning. You're always growing, and it's a situation that continues to stay fluid. So that's great that you've had that support and have that lens. One of the things that you started to highlight that I really want to dig into a little bit is you talked about at-bat practice opportunities. What were some of those things like, and how did they prepare you for the role itself?
I'll give you 2 examples, one that's a larger example, and then one that is more kind of a day-to-day activity that was really great. And I'll start with more of the day-to-day activity because I think that this is really applicable for folks. But my leadership, again, they've always known, I've said from day one, I don't think I'm ready now, but I do want to grow into a leader role. And so they've given me different opportunities, such as being heavily involved in the interview process, which is so important. Even before I was in this leadership role, being able to just get a sense of different interview styles that work for both myself and also, more importantly, for the candidates has been huge. Different pitfalls in interviewing has been huge. And then even being able to take the connection of going through the interview process and then moving into more of a mentor role for some of those candidates has also been just such a simple and impactful way of preparing me for a leadership role, because in many cases, that mentor role is a leadership role, whether you want to call it that or not, and taking a lot of those day-to-day activities of bringing someone on. So that, I think, is a really actionable and very doable way for folks to get into it. The second one, which I say is bigger, but I don't want to put too much of an emphasis on that, is the ability to co-found the DocuSign Women in Solution Engineering Employee Resource Group with Leah McTiernan here at DocuSign. Since we did the webinar that you mentioned earlier, James, I had a lot of people reach out to me that said, wow, that's so cool, but how do you even get started? It seems really complicated. And I bring that up because I'm shocked at how impressive it looks right now. I'll be honest, not to say we didn't put a lot of work and effort into it, but it started very small. It started very, very small, and it gave me incredible leadership experience and exposure. And in turn, as we've grown, what I'm excited about now is that we're able to give other women and allies of the WISE program their own leadership exposure and opportunities. So I say that that was a great opportunity, but it started small. So don't think that it's something that you can't try to do yourself, whether it's building a WISE program or some other type of program. Take the word WISE out and insert any other program or even project in that spot. And that's just a great way to really test out your leadership skills.
No, that's a great story. I want to just applaud you and congratulate you, because I think WISE at DocuSign is one of the premier programs, and you guys are really leading the way. It's very impressive what you've been doing there and the experience that it's given you. You guys should be commended as being a true leader in terms of that program. I just want to mention that I do like what you said about exposure into the interview process. I think getting into the interview process is good because it gives somebody a little bit of a taste of that process. And I think it exposes them to a lot of the day-to-day that actually happens when you're a frontline or second line leader. So I like to hear that you did that. Let me ask you a question on maybe what prompted this specific move now. Was there anything that was like, hey, this is the right situation for you to move in? Or did you create the opportunity yourself?
As you can tell, I love my company. DocuSign's amazing. And we have just been growing hand over fist for the longest time, including during the pandemic. But our team has exploded in growth. And so it was a natural transition to step into leadership from that aspect. And again, my boss and my VP have done a great job of kind of grooming me, knowing that this is something that I've wanted. We've made it a part of my annual reviews, my mid-year check-ins. What can I be doing to prepare for when that time comes? But it really ultimately was just a fact of we're growing so much that it's time to add another leader into the mix.
That's fantastic. And I'm really excited to start getting into some of the nitty gritty, because I would really like to know what the transition has been like so far.
This transition has been from an individual contributor into a manager role within the same company. I'd imagine that there's certainly differences if you were to leave your company as an individual contributor and start as a manager somewhere else. But I've been really fortunate. I've heard a lot of horror stories about folks that go from that IC role to a manager role where you're suddenly folks that you were team members of, and now you're their boss. We've got a really great culture here, and I don't take that for granted. I know it could be a lot more difficult, but the folks that now are on my team have been great. They've been incredibly supportive. And I think a really big aspect of that is the perception that my boss, Dan, and I have worked on for quite some time of it was kind of well known that I was going to move into that role, if that makes sense. You know, we went through the interview process and everything along those lines, but I think it's really, really, really important that your leaders help you to build that perception of you while you're still an individual contributor. It's huge, because if that perception isn't already built, the folks that are in your existing sphere of influence and your soon to become sphere of influence in your new role, it's going to be a hard time for them to look at you in a new capacity, especially if you've been in that IC role for a long time. So I really do put a lot of onus on not just you, but also your leadership to make sure that they're helping you to develop that brand throughout.
You've talked about the support of your leadership, and it sounds like DocuSign has really instilled that into the culture, which is really great to hear. In terms of being promoted into leadership within your own company, what are some of the benefits of that you feel fortunate to have?
It's interesting. I've made some really great connections with other now peers of mine that are managers in solution engineering here at DocuSign that have come on board to the company recently. And we've kind of bonded. And I said, listen, let's make a deal. You're coming in with management experience, but no experience within the organization. So let's have a little bit of a deal here. Well, you'll help me with some management development, and I'll help you with all of the DocuSign contacts and helping you with the product. So I feel very fortunate that, especially through my involvement with WISE, I've made a lot of contacts within DocuSign, and I look at that as being a big asset of mine. And then also, of course, knowing the product, it's helpful for me to be able to help advise some of the folks on my team on, here's what I would do because I was just in your shoes. So while I might not have all of the true management experience, if you will, I know who to go to in product, for example, or marketing or success team and things along those lines because I've got those relationships.
And that's where you can provide value right away. So I'm kind of the opposite. I'm someone who's been in management for some time, and I came into a company like Salesforce, which is a very complex and complicated landscape internally. And so while I have that management experience, I don't have the Salesforce way of doing things. And there are benefits. And I think the best teams have the combinations of internal promotions and external, because a diverse management team allows for diversity in thought and continues to move the needle forward in different ways. So I love that you've done that. And I also try to give that advice to as many people as I can, because when you get into management, it is a hard step. There's a lot to learn, especially in your first year. There's a lot of on-the-job learning. But if you know the company, you know the product, and you know that landscape, you can provide immediate value, which is really an important component of the role specifically. What has been your favorite part about the job so far?
So my favorite part about the job, it's hard to really boil that down to one thing in particular, but I would have to say that the ability to see people grow, if you will, I think has been really wonderful. I'm getting to know people on a different level. It says something about, I think, my stage in life too. I've always really loved being that key person in a meeting, in a really big executive meeting, high stakes type of a thing, and being that person up on that stage, if you will, giving the message and delivering the presentation. But now I'm actually kind of surprised how much I really enjoy helping people to now be that person and watching their successes and helping them to prep for it. It's been really interesting. So I enjoy now being more behind the scenes and helping people based on my experience and being in those shoes for so long to be able to say, here's some of the pitfalls to look out for, here's some of the areas that you should highlight, and seeing them grow with that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because really that's what management is all about and leadership is about, is empowering those individuals to be better and helping them grow. Kelley, tell us a little bit more about the realities of the role, right? What is maybe not going as according to plan?
I'd say two things. One, as a solution engineer, solution consultant, whatever you're called at your organization, we are literally built to paint a good picture about whatever product it is that we're selling or value we're trying to deliver or problem we're trying to solve. And that's really been ingrained in me. And one of the things that I think has made me good as an individual contributor. So with that being said, now having to pivot and having to give tough feedback or deliver not so great news is really difficult. And I'm not saying that that's easy for anyone, but I have literally been ingrained for so long of, I've just got to give the positive message, turn the bad stuff around. And now that's not always the case. That's been tough. And I'd say the other piece of this is that there's an emotional toll and an emotional exhaustion that I somewhat expected, but I don't think I expected how much it was going to be, because when you're dealing with software, generally speaking, most things are black and white. You hit this button or you hit that button. It works this way or it works that way. But in management, and again, for any of you leaders out there, you're going to probably do a face palm to say, gosh, why didn't you realize this sooner? But there are a million shades of gray. Nothing is black and white. And I found that no matter what decision I make, especially because my sphere of influence has grown so much, you might make some people happy, and that same exact message might make other people really unhappy. And it's exhausting. At the end of the day, especially during COVID, I'm used to being on the road more, but during COVID, I'm not leaving my desk. So I'm literally not burning any physical calories, but I find myself to be exhausted. The good news is that I have some incredible mentors, James, that have said, that's not surprising. We know you. This is very typical and something we would expect of you, Kelley. And it's something that you are going to build muscle memory on and develop, and it will get a little bit easier over time. But I've had to really fall back and believe that message because it's hard. So I think that emotional aspect of it is something that's been a big shift for me.
I really appreciate you sharing that and explaining that perspective, because I know that's not easy to share. But one of the things about being a leader that you mentioned is you have to watch your words. And as you go higher up within an organization, I think there tends to be more and more emphasis / scrutiny on every word that you actually say. And you're right. You have to make sure your message is crafted appropriately, because you might think that it has good intention, but in reality, someone takes it a different way. And that's what happens when you're in leadership. And you mentioned the emotion of it. I think especially now it is so hard with COVID and everyone adjusting to the global pandemic. And like you said, being on the road and now being at home. But when you become a manager, it's not just you anymore. It's the good, the bad of everyone on your team that are your direct team, and also the secondary teams. And so it is a lot to handle. And I appreciate you sharing that. Have you found any ways to cope with it so far, or to be able to manage through that situation?
So I have some really wonderful mentors, both here at DocuSign and outside of DocuSign, that are really open to allowing me to share my concerns. And by the way, from a mentor and mentee perspective, I've been really pleasantly surprised with how much you can get back as a mentor. But as a mentee, just make sure that you're holding up your end of the bargain also. Like, I am trying really hard when I reach out to one of my mentors to talk about a challenging situation, to fill them back up and ask them how they're doing, or ask if I can help them with anything, and always providing a thank you so that I can continue to use those resources, if you will.
I'm so happy you brought that up, because I think that's one of the challenges that mentor and mentee programs face, is that sometimes it tends to be one way, but we always, as mentees, want to try to give our mentors back something and thank them for their time. And it sounds like you've really surrounded yourself with a great network of people that are helping you guide the way, because we can't do it alone. And, it's great to hear that you already know that, and you can talk through these situations, you can role play with these individuals, and it will help you grow and manage and know how to handle these situations as you approach them in your career.
If I can add to that, James, I had a good friend of mine, Christelle. I got to give her a shout out. She told me a long time ago that you should build your own personal board of directors and have those different folks play a role for you. And it's folks that you look up to and you want to grow to be like and grow to be with. That was incredible advice that she gave me years ago that I've used so many times.
That is fantastic advice. And for everybody listening, even myself, I just wrote a note down, and I am definitely going to consider that. That's a great way to look at life and a professional career. So Kelley, you've really talked about some of the challenges happen. I have to ask, you do have a family at home. You're definitely busy. I know we were prepping, you were cooking dinner at the same time. How has the adjustment been, the promotion been with a family at home during a pandemic? Give us maybe some insights, because I know that you're not alone and there's people listening that would love to hear your perspective on this.
I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. My 6-year-old just finished kindergarten, which it's just been so crazy. My 4-year-old is normally in daycare every day, which she loves. And I'm not going to lie, this has not been easy. It's been really, really hard. But with that being said, I have to put it out there that this is not an ideal time to make a change in any part of your career, but If it's something that you want, don't put it off because of, my family life or my whatever you have going on, an aging parent or whatever the case may be. You're going to figure out how to make it work. I mean, having young kids has always been something that I've said, I know I'm not ready yet, but, and it's okay if you really aren't ready, but I have to say too, I got another great piece of advice that I have to share with folks from one of my mentors, Kevin, here at DocuSign, when I was even thinking about getting into this role, because the closer the reality of this role came, the more I started panicking. I kept saying, I'm so ready, I'm so ready, I'm so ready. And then when it really started to become viable, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. And his advice was, listen, you're a mom. So, when you become a mom, that's pretty permanent. You can't get like a little bit into it and say, I'm not going to be a mom anymore. I'm going to return them on Amazon or send them back to Costco. You can't do that. But as a leader, you mentioned it earlier, not necessarily every best individual contributor is the best leader. I don't know, James, maybe I'm going to be a great leader. I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out myself. But the advice that Kevin gave was, and I kind of have it as a little bit of a parachute, if you will. If this doesn't work out for some reason, I can go back to being an individual contributor. It's okay. It doesn't work out for everyone. I got amazing friends and coworkers that were leaders in their past life, and they did a great job, and they were a leader for several years. And it came to a point in their life where they wanted to be an individual contributor again. I don't know what that's going to look like for me. I hope I really like this track. It's my goal. But don't feel like it's a be all and end all. You've got different phases in your life and phases in your career. So take the opportunity if it comes up, even if you don't necessarily feel ready for it.
Kelley, thank you so much for that. That was really impactful. I mean, I'm like, wow, that was an amazing response. I do want to ask on one more subject as we wrap up. Just to confirm, you have been promoted to the team that you are on. Is that correct?
Correct.
You mentioned your leaders expanding your brand and your perception of the next step. And that is critical to be promoted to the leader of a team that you were just on. But what else have you done that has really allowed for that transition to go well? It's one thing for leaders to say that, but when you're in the role, your actions have to speak louder than your words. And so what advice do you have for those individuals that are trying to make that move?
I have a huge piece of advice, and this is something that I think is extremely fundamental. So we're all in sales at the end of the day in a pre-sales role. So I'd imagine everyone's heard the acronym ABC, always be closing. It's very much the same way, especially if you have any interest in moving into a leadership role at your company. It's always be interviewing. From day one, you need to look at your role and every action, every phone call that you get on, every meeting that you're on as an interview for that next step. And I've been at DocuSign for almost 4 years, and I've really tried to take that approach of every time I get in front of a leader or a new rep or a different part of the organization, or I'm on a customer meeting, this is an interview for me to be able to take that next step. And this is an opportunity for me to build that brand. You cannot expect just one day to say, okay, I'm ready to make that move. I saw a leadership job come up and I'm going to apply for it. Especially if you're doing it internally, if you haven't taken that time to make that brand well known and build those connections, you're not going to get it. I know for certain that one of the reasons I was able to get the role was because many of the decision makers I had already built relationships with, and I asked them for their support and their backing. So if you haven't taken the time over your tenure to already be doing that, it's going to be an uphill battle for you. So I really highly recommend that you just think of it in that always be interviewing aspect.
Kelley, thank you so much for that perspective. I think this podcast has been super actionable for those that are looking to make a move into the role or in their first or even second years of the role, trying to figure it out. I think this has been great, and I really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. I loved it.
Before we close up, I have to end with 2 questions. And the first one is, what is your favorite part about the pre-sales role?
I love making people happy. I mean, that's just kind of a part of me. So to be able to go in and solve a problem for a customer, I think that the best way I heard someone describe a pre-sales role is someone puts a 5,000 piece puzzle in front of you and just throws a bunch of the pieces out. And you still have to somehow figure it out and make it work. but I've been in some different meetings where I literally got a standing ovation from people because they were like, oh my gosh, this can make our lives so much easier. And that is such a fun thing to do. Like you really can go in and solve people's problems. That's easily my favorite thing about it.
You've given some advice throughout the podcast, but maybe just to wrap is what advice do you have people who want to make that jump to leadership?
I feel like I'm the perfect example here. Don't wait for that right time. There is not such a thing. Again, I've got 2 small kids at home. My husband works full time. He's got a very demanding job. We are now quarantined in our house 24 hours a day. There is no right time. Don't wait for that magical moment. And again, remember to always be interviewing. Even if you think that leadership opportunity is 6 months, a year, 6 years from now, you're interviewing right now, and don't forget that.
Kelley, thanks again for your time, and I really appreciate your perspective, and I appreciate you open up about some of these things. Again, congratulations on the promotion, and keep up the great work with Wise at DocuSign. You guys are really leading the way and example for everyone, and you are as well. So it's really been great getting to know you and working with you, and again, thanks for your time.
Well, the PreSales Collective has taken it to the next level. So, James, thanks for all you're doing. It's a pleasure. And let's do this again soon. Let's check back in at a year or something like that to keep seeing how things are going.
I agree. I think we should do the continual check-in. We should just keep this as an evolving series within the podcast. Are you in for that?
I'm in, James.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kelley.
Thank you.
All right, PreSales Collective. That was a really great episode with Kelley, and I really appreciate her perspective. I appreciate her being vulnerable about the realities of the role, especially during a pandemic. A couple of things that I took away is I really like that Kelley's leaders gave her at-bats in practice prior to putting her into the role, especially when it comes to interviews. I think that's a nice, easy way to transition when it comes to the role of leadership generally. I also really like that she talked about her leaders helped with the perception. Kelley made it known that she wanted to be in leadership, and her leaders helped, gave her responsibilities, help with that perception so that once she made the move to leadership, it was a logical move and accepted amongst her peers and her teammates. One of the things that is really impactful to me that she mentioned is that leadership is not as black and white as the individual contributor role. And I think that's really important because once you manage people, you are taking on them completely. What's going well, what's not going well, personal life, professional life. And that is a big component of the first line leader role, especially in larger organizations. Probably my favorite part of today's episode was what she talked about building your board of directors. I love that. And if you think about people that you're surrounding yourself with, people that you're talking to, friends, colleagues, peers, mentors, those people are especially important to helping you elevate, helping you grow, and helping you reach the next level. All right, PreSales Collective, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Again, please follow, like, share on all the social media channels. We hope to see you next week. And if you have any feedback, always reach out to me on Slack. Talk to you next time.